Telepathy. Is it a supernatural or natural phenomenon? By Olga Bogdashina. But first, let's listen to Jill Bolte Taylor, a neuroscientist who had a left hemisphere brain stroke.
I felt my spirit surrender. And in that moment, I knew that I was no longer the choreographer of my life, and either the doctors rescue my body and give me a second chance at life, or this was perhaps my moment of transition. When I woke later that afternoon, I was shocked to discover that I was still alive. When I felt my spirit surrender, I said goodbye to my life, and my mind was now suspended between two very opposite planes of reality. Stimulation coming in through my sensory systems felt like pure pain. Light burned my brain like wildfire, and sounds were so loud and chaotic that I could not pick a voice out from the background noise, and I just wanted to escape. Because I could not identify the position of my body in space, I felt enormous and expansive, like a genie just liberated from her bottle. And my spirit soared free like a great whale gliding through a sea of silent euphoria. Nirvana. I found nirvana. And I remember thinking there's no way I would ever be able to squeeze the enormousness of myself back inside this tiny little body. But then I realized, but I'm still alive. I'm still alive, and I have found nirvana. And if I have found nirvana and I'm still alive, then everyone who is alive can find nirvana. And I pictured a world filled with beautiful, peaceful, compassionate, loving people who knew that they could come to this space at any time, and that they could purposely choose to step to the right of their left hemispheres and find this peace. And then I realized what a tremendous gift this experience could be. What a stroke of insight this could be to how we live our lives. And it motivated me to recover.
Olga Bogdashina is one of the few that also connected the dots and understands that some autistics are actually more right hemisphere dominant and have so-called non-ordinary states of consciousness naturally all the time. She writes, "If we see telepathy as something unscientific and not worthy of the investigation, we are quick to dismiss it, and all the reports of the cases that might illustrate it are considered anecdotal, that cannot be replicated, and unreliable. But what if we look at it as a form of non-verbal communication? Right hemisphere doesn't have words, it has pictures. We may assume that non-verbal individuals who do not develop understanding of verbal language yet, which is a left hemisphere quality, understanding and speaking language. Verbal autistic persons who develop and use language differently. They possibly shift more into the left hemisphere thinking, and in the process might actually lose their connection to non-ordinary states of consciousness of the right hemisphere in the process. But some autistics never do. They are always connected to the right hemisphere perception, and instead of going all verbal and left hemisphere dominant, they develop other ways to interpret information intuitively, and what we may call telepathy. It can be one of these ways. The telepathic feeling seems to depend on emotional bonds. The stronger the emotional bond between two people, the stronger the feeling and success rate of so-called telepathy. We can see some similarities between autistic individuals who rely on the system of sensing and in many cases are non-verbal, and shamans. The ability to understand non-verbal communication proper, telepathy, seems to be present at the very dawn of civilization, and it seems to have taken humans thousands of years to get rid of it. The earliest example known to us is a shaman. The Nobel Prize-winning physicist Professor Brian Josephson, who has studied the brain and the paranormal for 30 years, believes his research may provide an explanation for paranormal spookiness. If electrons can jump around the lab instantaneously, then surely it might be possible for one brain to tell another that it is seeing without using normal methods of communication. Seems logical. Freud actually defined telepathy as a primitive form of communication made dormant by language. In other words, it is the ability mentally to communicate thought, emotions, words, or images silently to another person. But is it really primitive? Or is it actually way more developed? Stillman compares it to meditation or prayer when people send spiritual communication to the higher power. Henry Bergson suggests that people are far less definitely cut off from each other, soul from soul, than they are body from body. He suggests that it was probable, or at least possible, that a subtle and subconscious influence of soul to soul was constantly taking place, that was unnoticeable by active consciousness. The philosopher argued that we have no right to deny its possibility just because it is considered to be supernatural. Our ignorance does not entitle us to say what may be natural or not. If telepathy does not square at all well with our preconceived notions, it may be more true that our preconceived notions are false than that telepathy is fictitious. We must overcome this prejudice. Telepathy and subconscious mental life combined to make us realize the wonder of the soul. It is not spatial, it is spiritual. Askew and Donnellan, 1993, put forward a possible explanation of why there are so many reports of telepathy among those who have mental disabilities, in contrast to normal people, whose telepathic abilities are usually elusive. It may be that a so-called sixth sense is present in all of us at birth, but as speech and locomotion develop, the need for it fades. Still, many people seem to retain residual psychic abilities, especially at times of accident or trauma. For people with impaired communication capabilities, the sixth sense may remain active and utilized. The speaking world is simply rediscovering it. The problem is, however, how can these children know that others are unable to do it? There is another useful concept developed by Ernest Hartman in his book Boundaries of the Mind from 1991. Thick and thin boundaries. Hartman proposes that there are people who are thick-skinned. They are very solid and well organized, which is a left hemisphere ability. Such people have very thick boundaries, i.e., they are well defended. At the other extreme are people who are thin-skinned. They are especially sensitive, open, or vulnerable. So-called empaths or highly sensitive people, defined by Elaine Aron. Such people have particularly thin boundaries. According to Hartman, differences in thin or thick boundaries are reflected in neurobiological differences as well and start very early in life. Donna Williams, 1998, offers her explanation of the phenomenon. The body is more than a physical form. Of course it is. It is also an energy form. Some people's energy boundaries are more open than most people's. These are the individuals most prone to a wider range of so-called psychic experiences. This state is involuntary, beyond their control. They can either give in to it or try to fight it. Donna hypothesizes that we are born into our bodies before being born into the world and develop a perceptual sense of body connectedness even before we are born. This assumption is confirmed by different people. One of them is Stanislav Grof. You can read up on that in the 4 stages of birth, their agonies and ecstasies. 80 years ago, Austrian psychoanalyst Otto Rank theorized that when we are born, we experience a birth trauma that affects us for the rest of our lives. But more recently, psychiatrist Stanislav Grof has created a model for understanding in greater depth the kinds of effects that birth can have upon our later lives. He writes that there are 4 distinct stages of birth, or what he calls basic perinatal matrices, BPM, that give rise to different kinds of traumas, as well as positive experiences, and that have different types of effects upon our future development. So the late Donna Williams thought that these so-called unborn, born people either outgrow this not being fully into their bodies, at least to some extent, or they are called late developers, or people with developmental differences, or even developmentally disabled. Those who appear not to seek to make sense of their environment may not necessarily be intellectually disabled, disturbed, crazy, or sensorily impaired, but may, in spite of not using the same system everyone else uses, still have one of their own. They may, in spite of apparent delayed development, actually continue to use a system that others have left behind very much earlier. Quote by Donna Williams, 1998. If only we could accept that some people use different systems, mechanisms to perceive, interpret, and communicate, and not deny them the right to use the systems they are comfortable with, while helping them adjust to the world around them, both sides would win.